Hello, Happy New Year, welcome back to my channel. Where have you been, Chris? Well, I kind of took the Christmas period off. Hope you don't mind. But also, I know I said that the Digesting the Church on Ruby Road video would be sort of out soon afterwards. Now, I did record one while I was away for Christmas. Here's the evidence. It's just that I've been on a journey with the Church on Ruby Road. And since I made that video, I've watched it 2 more times, and I'll be honest with you, I needed to. The Church on Ruby Road felt like an episode, almost like no other episode of Doctor Who, and it took me a while to work out exactly what I thought about it. Now, I will tell you exactly the journey that I had, which was the first viewing on Christmas Day. I hated it. I know. I really, really didn't like it. And it wasn't because I despaired at the new Doctor or Ruby Sunday rubbed me up the wrong way. It wasn't anything to do with that at all. I just didn't like it, and I tried to articulate why in that video that I recorded, that I've just shown a clip of, which is a kind of like a redundant now. I don't think there's anything in there that I currently still think. It was mainly because I don't think I liked how it progressed, in that when Ruby vanishes from existence because the goblins have gone back and taken her as a baby, that doesn't feel like the beginning of a third act. That feels like a whole other story starting quite late. And it kind of threw me a little bit. And then when I was thinking back, it just felt like a series of vignettes that didn't really hang together all that well. And I was bitterly disappointed because Shooty had showed so much promise at the end of the giggle that I was really, really, really excited about this episode. He continues to show that promise throughout this episode. Well, because it didn't really feel like it was one whole story to me. I didn't care for it. And yeah, it put a little bit of a downer on the day, to be honest. But it goes to show, I'm as guilty as anyone for these sort of like knee-jerk instant reactions. And then I was thinking, how am I going to do this Digesting the Church on Ruby Road video when I disliked it this much? I don't know how I'm going to be able to articulate that well enough to justify it. So I rewatched it the next day, on Boxing Day, and liked it a bit more. But still, I felt like my criticisms on the first viewing, the previous one, were still valid, and I didn't like how it went from A to B. It just felt a bit too haphazard. And that's when I recorded that video while I was away, where the dust had settled a little bit, and I was like, yeah, I liked it a little bit more. Then I watched it again. And this was after having spoken to a couple of friends who also fans, and they seemed to really love it. And the reaction that I saw online seemed to really love it. And I started to think that, what am I missing that these are all getting? So I was like, what did you like about it? And the answer I got was pretty much, they just did. And I realised that I was the opposite. I couldn't really give that much of an answer as to why I didn't like it. I just didn't. And so I gave it a third chance. I've given it a fourth chance since as well. I watched it 4 times now before I decided. I know exactly where I stand on the Church on Ruby Road enough to do this video. And I don't hate it anymore. Not by any means. Nor do I love it, but I do think it's a solid episode. I think what might be colouring that initial sort of like dislike to it is that, let's take, for example, which a lot of people compare it to, Rose, the episode Rose. That sort of like introduces the Doctor through the companion's eyes in much the same way the Church on Ruby Road does. But this was the first time we'd seen Eccleston, and it had that sort of like, I guess, validity of the unknown and the mystery of who this character was, because it'd been away for 16 years. I mean, okay, 9 if you count the movie, but like fans knew who the Doctor was, but new audiences didn't. And I think it was kind of going for the same thing. The Church on Ruby Road sort of felt like it was going for the same thing, like a springboard to a new era. And there is time passed between the Giggle and the Church on Ruby Road for the Doctor, I guess, because he sort of arrives kind of fully formed. He doesn't feel like a new Doctor. I mean, he might be, and they might explore that later on, but it does feel like what we've got here is this fresh beginning in the same way that Rose was, but it's almost as if, like, let's say Rose was this huge relaunch for the era, which it was, but 2 weeks previously we'd seen Paul McGann turn into Christopher Eccleston. Rose wouldn't work as well as it does. And so I think because of that, the Church on Ruby Road had that same almost drawback in that I can't consider it this fresh beginning when 2 weeks ago, is it 2 or 3, maybe 3, we'd just had the 60th anniversary specials, and therefore it feels like a continuation rather than this fresh start, which also is fine, but it's very much framed as this fresh start. And I think that was at odds, for me anyway. The way it landed was it was all sort of like all muddled up. And it took me a while to tune into the, I don't like the word vibe, but it took me a while to tune into the kind of idiosyncrasies of the Church on Ruby Road. Now, with it also feeling like a continuation because we'd seen the Giggle, it does still also feel like we're starting afresh because obviously it's the new Doctor's first full episode. That's always going to feel exciting as a new beginning, and you know, Ncuti is every bit as dependable as I expected he would be. Lots of flourishes in there that I really enjoy. I have seen some criticism that because seeing the Doctor dancing on the dance floor, I feel like that has ruffled some feathers as much as it has delighted people, and I think it kind of delights me. I know that it's not what we're used to seeing the Doctor be like, and I saw some criticism in that, well, he's meant to be an oddball, he's not meant to be that cool, but I don't know, I'm getting strong Pertwee vibes from Gatwa so far. And I know that Ncuti has kind of referenced John Pertwee in a lot of interviews, I think in GQ, and certainly in Doctor Who magazine. Now, the John Pertwee Doctor, I would never class him as an oddball. He's got certain eccentricities, but so too is Ncuti's Doctor, the vocabulary of rope and getting offended that the goblins are called time travellers by Ruby. That's all in there. But this is a Doctor who is sort of like leaning into the cool, and I think the third Doctor kind of did that as well. I would never class the third Doctor as an oddball. He's got certain eccentricities, like I said, but he's very sort of like I guess kind of like straight-laced in that he's got fewer of those goofy tendencies for the other Doctors that do, or certain other Doctors do. And so I liked this sort of like new type of introduction to the Doctor twirling about on the dance floor, just sort of like fitting in. That felt like new. And because I've said before, I was worried about Russell T Davies coming back, that it would just feel like retreading old ground. The 60th anniversary specials, despite having Tennant and Tate back, they did feel like a new era to me. And I think that is consolidated here by the fact that now we have a new Doctor who is an unknown entity to us, essentially, and we're going to get to know him. So that gave me... and it didn't on the first viewing, because on the first viewing I was a little bit sort of like discombobulated by how disjointed I felt the Church on Ruby Road was. Now that the dust has settled and I have digested it, I do think the Church on Ruby Road is, while not like hugely remarkable, it's a strong starting point for the 15th Doctor's era. When I say it's disjointed, I think another reason for that is I've just spoken about how the Doctor is seen twirling about on the dance floor, having the time of his life, fitting in. And that works for me. But it's not the first we see of him in this episode. The first we see of him in this episode is the pre-title sequence where he gets out of the TARDIS at the church. And I just feel like, again, in the same way that I feel like it robs the episode of some of its impact, because to use the comparison to Rose again, let's say the opening bit of Rose after she wakes up, the alarm goes off at 7 a.m. and then she goes about her day, she meets Mickey for lunch, and while she's frolicking at the fountain, she then goes back into work, and then over the road we see the Doctor in his leather jacket watching her go into Hendrix because he's staking the place out. Run wouldn't have the same impact later on. And I feel like that's kind of the case here. So I feel like we start the Church on Ruby Road kind of with the wind taken out of the sails. And I stand by that. I still do think that. It doesn't bother me as much now as it did on that first viewing. And so like, because that kind of like then carries through, it never really feels like it's Ruby's story from start to finish. It feels like the focus kind of shifts a little bit too much, and Ruby's the focal point for a bit, and then the Doctor is. And while that's fine, if we are using Rose as a comparison, Rose is kind of the focal point all the way through that episode. And I wish Ruby was here, because Ruby is great. Like, the 15th Doctor is great, Ruby is great, they are great together. I am very optimistic about this TARDIS team. And I even like the kind of like, when I say it felt like a new era, it wasn't just because these are new characters. I kind of like what Russell T Davies has actually spoken about, the leaning into the sort of fantasy element. I think that can work. I don't want it to become the flavour, because it works as well as it does in Doctor Who, because it is used sparingly, like the mind robber, and I just like tapping into that a little bit more as an idea. So the idea of the goblins, which is another. While the goblins are like as an idea, they're also paradoxically kind of like a drawback for this episode for me as well, because they're essentially the threat, but they're not there all the way through. And the Goblin King he's made that big a deal of as a prop, but not as a foe. And so it kind of ends up feeling like there's no bad guy in this episode. And I guess like that could work, but when the Autons are in Rose, that feels like a legitimate threat that the Doctor has to vanquish, and Rose gets to see this is almost a little bit like what the Doctor's life is like. Here, the Goblin King and the goblins don't have that same impact, and so I don't know. And they steal and eat babies as well, so they should have that impact. But for me, they just don't. And I get there's more important things, and that's putting the Doctor and Ruby together and getting them sort of like acquainted and assimilating Ruby into the environment of the show, and it's certain unique set of parameters, and I get that. But I don't know, because of the sort of like the distance with which the goblins are kept, this story doesn't feel like it has a credible villain threat, and I still don't think it hangs together as well as it could. So That's why it's taken me such a long time to get around to actually doing this video, because I have had to think on this far more than probably any other episode of Doctor Who I've watched as it goes out live. Do you know what I mean? Like, the Church on Ruby Road is in that initial video that I made, I think on the 27th of December, that I was going to put out. I said, and then if I can find the clip, I'll put it in. But I said, I don't think there's much to talk about with the Church on Ruby Road. And boy, was I wrong, because it's taken me week and a half, 10 days, to actually properly let it sit with me, to figure out what I actually think. And I've been thinking about it a lot since it aired. And I can't believe that I started with the sort of like impulsive, immediate reaction of, I hated that. And I did my festive specials ranking that was supposed to go out on Christmas Day, but internet issues meant it went out on like early Boxing Day morning. But in that, after I watched The Church on Ruby Road, I thought, do you know what? That's probably, if not at the bottom, like one up from it. Like The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, Church on Ruby Road. And again, I'm amazed that that was my initial reaction, because having watched it again now several times, it's far better than that. It's still got issues, it's still got problems, I think, and I still can't quite see what the friends that I have that loved about it. But it is a good episode. I'm not saying it's a great episode. I don't think that just yet. Maybe a few more viewings and I will see what it is I'm missing. But at the moment, I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of potential there. It just doesn't sort of like hang together as well as I would have liked. But obviously there's a lot of, I mean, like, Ruby's home life fleshes her out incredibly well. I love her adoptive mother. I love her adoptive grandmother in particular. Mrs. Flood, while I guess surface level intriguing, doesn't excite me as much as it might do other people, because I do feel like it feels like it's a trick that's been done. Do you know what I mean? I don't feel like there are actually going to be legitimate clues for us to work out who Mrs. Flood is. I feel like it's going to be like she'll crop up, or like we'll see her again, but there won't be actually, in the same way that like with Missy, really, you can speculate that she was the Master, but until it was actually confirmed, she could have been anyone. Like, she could have been Romana, she could have been the Rani. All you do is you see these people and it's another question asked each time, but no actual clues that invite you to work it out in a kind of like fair play way. Hope I'm wrong, but I've got a feeling that we'll just see Mrs. Flood a few times and there'll be a lot of like, who is she? I think this, I think that. And then because of like with Bad Wolf and Mr. Saxon, even the cracks in the universe for Series 5, while they actually like did stuff, they were still just like, oh, there, one's shown up. I wonder what's going to happen here. And we did find out new information, but there was no real sort of like clues for you to actually properly work it out. So I feel like Doctor Who's done this before, and because of that, I'm just not going to even bother. I'm just going to keep watching, and then when Mrs. Flood appears again, it'll be like, oh, there's Mrs. Flood again. We'll find out what that is. But until we actually find out who she is, I'm not even going to bother trying to figure it out, because it never works out for me. I always end up sort of like coming up with an idea that I like, and it's never that. So yeah, all for what's to come. The trailer for the next season looks great. Like, I'm already on board with Ncuti as the 15th Doctor, and I feel like he's growing into the character. We're only going to sort of like see more facets to him, and that excites me because I like what we have already. I feel like I've responded to the 15th Doctor fairly positively quite quickly, so I feel like that's a good starting point. All he has to do now is annoy me rather than win me over. And I don't think he's going to annoy me because there's been more than enough opportunities for him to do that. And I've seen how he plays certain things. And it's whether or not, it's how a Doctor plays those certain things that does annoy me. Like the exuberance, for example. And I like how he does it. So, fully on board with the 15th Doctor, fully on board with Ruby, completely on board with them together. I think they've got the makings for like a duo for the ages. And while I had reservations about Russell T Davies coming back, he's expunged most of them in that it does feel like a new start rather than a rehash. It doesn't feel like a step backwards. And that I really very much like. And so while I do have still certain reservations about the Church on Ruby Road, I cannot emphasize enough how far I've come from that first viewing, where I just didn't like it. I do like it. I like it very much now. I don't think I love it. But I like it very, very much. And I prefer it to the Giggle. I think it's a stronger episode than the Giggle now, and that's on 4 viewing, so maybe it'll only still keep creeping up. Now, I will do an updated festive specials ranking at some point, and so we'll see where the Church on Ruby Road sits. I've got ideas at the moment, but maybe a few more viewings to fully sort of like cement exactly what I think about it, because as this video is still, I mean, I'm doing it now, I'm still digesting, even 10 days later, I am still digesting the Church on Ruby Road. Also coming up, I'll be doing an updated ranking of anniversary specials to include the 60th, plus also the Big Finish 60th as well. So that'll be an updated list coming soon. The marathon will continue afoot. I'm currently doing a marathon of Doctor Who from the very beginning. The next one to drop there will be Fury from the Deep, and I promise you that'll be very soon because, well, I'll be wearing the same jumper in that video because I'm about to do it as soon as I finish this one. So, as ever, thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great Christmas. I hope you had a great New Year. If you haven't already, please do like this video, share it around. The channel is still relatively new. I know I started in June, that's 6 months, but you know, I'm approaching this very organically. I'm not sort of like hammering it or anything. All the growth has been organic, so please do share around. It would be a massive, massive help. And what do you think of the Church on Ruby Road? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you back here soon for Fury from the Deep. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I will see you soon.